Hello, everybody, and welcome to Haiku Talk. I'm your host, Ben Ga, your friendly neighborhood haiku poet, and today we're going to be taking a look at a piece from the latest issue of Akitsu Quarterly. That would be the Fall-Winter 2025 issue, with a poem by Kim Klugh, with the first line of The Way Spring Arrives, 2. All right, with that said, you know what time it is. It's time to sit back, relax, grab yourself a tasty beverage, and let's haiku. Welcome back, everybody. It's good to be with you again for another episode of Haiku Talk. And this poem is a very pleasant one, so let's just get right to it. The poem goes like this. The way spring arrives, too, on little cat feet, pussy willows. The way spring arrives, too, on little cat feet, pussy willows. Now, what's really nice about this, it's just a pleasant moment. Also, we see some punctuation in here that we normally don't see, or a little more punctuation than we're used to seeing. We have a comma in that first line in mid-sentence, which is kind of an odd placement that don't see too often. And we've got the little 3 dots at the end of line 2, which is a special line, and we'll get to that in just a minute. I also like the way that the poem is structured on the page, with the first line being a long line, and it just kind of narrows its way down to that short third line. I really like poems that have that start broad and then give us a very tight focus. I always think of it as like a camera lens when you're doing a zoom. You have a wide shot and you zoom in to that focal point, and this does that as well. In this case, the poem is structured as with the fragment and the phrase. It puts the phrase on top, and that phrase is lines 1 and 2 of The Way Spring Arrives, 2, on little cat feet. And then the fragment is line 1, pussy willows. Now, something else that this poem does really well, and it kind of follows my rule on this that I have for myself, is that it's linked to another poem, a poem outside of haiku, a poem by Mr. Carl Sandburg, and that poem is Fog. And let me read to you that poem because it is nice and short. It is one that many people probably have read in grade school or high school, if you studied poetry at all, because it is short, it's famous. And for me, it's even more so having grown up in Illinois, which is where Carl Sandburg is from, and even doubly more so because his birth town is Galesburg, Illinois, and that is the place of my alma mater, Knox College, which is partly what pulled me to that institution and its creative writing program. But Carl Sandburg's famous Fog poem goes like this. Fog. The fog comes on little cat feet. It sits looking over harbor and city on silent haunches and then moves on. A wonderful little short poem by Carl Sandburg. And that on little cat feet, the second line in this poem happens to also be the second line in Kim Klugh's poem. The way spring arrives, too, on little cat feet, pussy willows. So the rule that I apply to myself when you are making a reference to something else is that the poem should be understandable whether you get the other reference or not. And I think this poem is very understandable and very delightful, even if you don't know the link to the Carl Sandburg Fog poem. But if you know that it links to the Carl Sandburg poem, you get an extra meaning out of it, another layer of meaning out of the poem, out of this haiku. And I just loved it, and it got me to pull out this old Carl Sandburg book that I haven't looked at in a while, many years actually, but always have loved. And I like the way that it acknowledges that poem. That is the way spring arrives too, as if to say, fog arrives on little cat feet, as Carl Sandburg says, but she's saying spring arrives too on little cat feet. And the way that spring arrives is with the emergence of pussy willows. And of course, we all know that, pussy willows and cats, pussycat, that's the link between the cat and the pussy willows in this poem. And that line on little cat feet is the link to the Sandburg poem. So a lot going on here in this little piece. And it just makes me very happy. I lit up the first time I read this, and I was like, "Oh, little cat feet!" Like, no, I don't have to look any further in this new episode, this new issue of Akitsu Quarterly. This is the poem I want to talk about, and that linking of referencing other poems or movies or things outside of your current genre of poetry. Even, I mean, it's still poetry, but it's not. Carl Sandburg is not a haiku poet. So it's a little bit of out of the normal swim lanes of haiku poets. A lot of times we reference other haiku, but it's nice to reference other poems too. I know I've done this. You can find a couple of those in my book, One Breath, linking to, both Samuel Taylor Coleridge's Rhyme of the Ancient Mariner, as well as the famous Red Wheelbarrow poem. But this one is a nice, famous link to Fog by Carl Sandburg. Now, all that aside, let's take a look at how this works and see how the poem works as it is without even knowing the linkage to Carl Sandburg. So what is the first line? The first line is, the way spring arrives too. The way spring arrives too. And so right away, we know we're talking about spring. And its arrival. So I'm put in a season, and I know that it's a topic of conversation, and I know that it's in comparison of something else. Don't necessarily know what that something else is yet. And I like the call of attention of the comma there in the first line. It's a little unusual to see. I think it's kind of cool here because I like what it does, and it's rather than breaking things in a line break or an extra, or not having the comma there at all. I think it's just a nice, again, letting the reader know, hey, comma, pause here. I mean, it is proper punctuation, but it's also just nice to see from time to time. And so that first line, great. I know we're in conversation with something else. I know that spring has arrived, and we're going to be talking about, the arrival of spring. So we get to line 2. And line 2 is, on little cat feet, on little cat feet. And so I already had a pause in the first line, and now I've got another pause in the second line to kind of think about things a little bit before we get to that third line. And so that pause in there causes me to reflect back and look at the whole lines 1 and 2 together. I know it's calling it attention to itself as this is the phrase. And so what is that? So the way spring arrives too on little cat feet. Now, in my mind right away, because I caught what on little cat feet was referring to, I immediately went and grabbed my book and looked it up. Is that the Fog poem? Yes, it's the Fog poem, so that's awesome. But I'm also a fan of things using that reference of to, like I too have this, or I too am that. I think that's a trick that goes, I attribute it to Isa. That's where I saw it probably the first and the most when I was learning to write this stuff, and it's something that I implement myself quite a bit. So I also kind of get a smile whenever I see that kind of to reference point. And so the way spring arrives too on little cat feet. Okay, it's a nice image. I like thinking about that. I'm thinking about how the arrival of spring, and I'm thinking about little cat feet, even beyond the poem reference. But in little cat feet, I have a cat. I know that the light touches, the way spring can arrive very gently, very mysteriously, very quietly. And then I get to line 3 of pussy willows. Pussy willows. And I got a wink and a smile to the, of course, not pussy willows aren't the only thing that indicates the arrival of spring, but it is a nice arrival of spring. It's a tactile arrival of spring. It's it's a funny name for what it is, but it's also a good description of what it is, because pussy willows are fuzzy, and it ties into the cat, little cat feet, and just kind of ties it all together really nicely into a nice moment, a nice poem, again with a nice wink to Carl Sandburg. Yeah, really cool, really cool. So if you are ever thinking about linking to another poem, or specifically something even outside of the haiku where people might not know what it is, this is a good example of how to do it and how to do it right. Like I said, if you don't know that Sandburg reference, the poem still works, but if you do know, extra kudos, and you get an extra smile out of this one. So thank you, Kim Klugh, for this wonderful poem. Thanks, Akitsu Quarterly, for another great issue. And thank you all for tuning in to another episode of Haiku Talk. And I'll just remind you, the things that YouTube likes to remind you of is, please like this, give it a thumbs up if you like this episode. Please think of subscribing to the channel if you haven't already. I know I keep getting more subscribers all the time, which is awesome. I love it. And if you've liked and subscribed, think about ringing the bell to be notified when new episodes arise. If you follow this channel for a while, you know I don't spam you with episodes. They come out once a week, once every couple weeks. Yeah, it's kind of in their little time frame. And yeah, thanks for joining in and being part of this audience, and part of supporting haiku, learning about haiku, and taking haiku as a serious form of literature. I think that's something else I really like about this poem, is that it links this poem to another poem that's part of the serious world of literature, that, something that's taught in normal schools, and a poet that's highly revered in the world of normal poetry. And I hate that I have to say that, but of normal poetry. But we are kind of in our own little world here in the Haiku Center community, for the good or the bad. I don't really care so much. I enjoy this. I enjoy this form. I want people to take it seriously, which is why I do this channel. And hopefully you find this informative. You find it you find that this is something worth taking seriously, and you might want to learn more and read more, and think about subscribing to journals that I reference here, thinking about looking up the poets that I have on this channel to see other works that they have done. A number of people have books for sale. It's another great way to learn things, or featured in anthologies and so on and so forth, which are other great ways to dig deeper into this wonderful, wonderful form of art. That said, thank you all for tuning in. I hope all is right in your world. And until next time, peace, everybody. Peace.